Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the Reconstructing History podcast.
I'm Bob.
I'm Cass.
I said I was going to do that.
We did say we were going to do that.
We are very boring people.
Predictable. Well, we said we were going to do it, so we did it.
Yes. We apologize that there was no podcast last week.
Yes.
The reality is that the original Reenactors Market was going on in the UK, and while we did not go ourselves, a lot of our patterns did, which meant we were working.
Yeah.
And
then sicky.
Yeah. And we
you can
often
probably still hear it in my voice because I'm awfully a lot like this.
Yeah.
So.
But no COVID.
No COVID.
Tested negative for COVID, so that was good. But yes, we don't normally print on the weekends.
No.
But we had a big order that needed to go to the Reenactors Market, so we printed last weekend, and then we were shot. And sorry.
It is.
didn't want to put on the lipstick for you guys.
It's
sorry.
a thing that happens.
Yes.
So what do we have to talk about? News. We have some really cool stuff to
Yes,
tell you about.
we have some. We're continuing our quest to revise all of our best-selling patterns. We have now produced a revision of 017, the 14th century women's kirtle, and 002, the 15th century women's kirtle, as well as 017Q and 002Q, which are the same things for larger sizes.
Yep.
Those, if you have purchased a download from us before, you will get an email from the website that says, there's a new version of this download available, and you can click on the link and get it for free. If you haven't purchased a download and you have purchased a paper pattern and you want a new paper pattern, drop us an email because we won't charge you twice we'll charge you for the paper and the shipping, but we won't charge you the full pattern price.
Yep.
Or if you just like to give us money for all of our hard work, and let me tell you what I've done, just so you know. The thing that, the 002 and 017 are two of our best-selling patterns, and they have been our best-selling patterns since the day they premiered.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, and they are very good patterns. I had been making 017 and 002 for friends and friends of friends.
And for yourself.
And for myself
years.
for decades before I came out with a pattern. Matter of fact, I didn't want to do 14th century, and there was too much demand from friends and people who knew us. They're like, why don't you ever do 14th century? Why are you always doing 16th century stuff? And I'm like, because you don't need a pattern for that. We need a pattern for that. So I did a pattern for that.
So there you go.
But everyone has always had trouble with the sleeve because the sleeve is odd. The sleeve is very, very typical medieval sleeve.
What do we call them, kids?
Sleevels.
Sleevels.
But this is different than the normal variety of sleevel. This particular sleevel is a medieval sleeve. It is the sleeve type that we see over and over again on extant medieval garments. And yes, there are extant medieval garments. There are a number. Anyone who tells you we don't have any extant 14th or 15th century kirtles doesn't know what they're talking about, because we do have quite a lot. We don't have them that are fitted the way people want them to be fitted. However, the sleeve exists, and the sleeve is extant over and over and over again in many different countries, and it all looks the same, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because,
It's like
they didn't have the internet.
Hit upon a good idea and it just spread.
They hit upon a good idea, or the idea happened the idea happened in different places at different times, but they all came to the same idea. So if you are used to other pattern companies that shall remain nameless giving you a modern sleeve on a kirtle pattern, and that's what you're used to because that's easy, because then you just run the seam, up the side of the body and down the sleeve. Well, that's not how a medieval sleeve was constructed, and we don't do modern. We do patterns for historical clothing, so we insist on doing this crazy medieval sleeve. And over the years, we've gotten a lot of people going, what do I do? What do I do? And no matter how many instructions you write about it, people still go, I don't understand. Well, guess what we've done now? We have not compromised the historical accuracy of the sleeve, because we do not do that. However, I have made marks
Notches, right?
Notches
Yes.
on both the sleeve and the body of the dress.
The sole tribute to modernity in the
notches
pattern
are okay.
is using the notches.
Yes, and it's the sleeve is notched, the pattern is the body is notched. The sleeve has been tested in every size from A through Q. So, line up the notches, go.
Yep.
And that doesn't preclude the fact that you have to fit it to your particular arm shape, and you have to fit the body to your particular body shape, etc. However, the sleeve is now guaranteed to fit perfectly in the armhole.
It makes orienting the sleeve a hell of a lot easier.
I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on this. So
hours. The cussing. Oh, the cussing.
oh my
Ladies
God,
and
because
gentlemen,
it would fit in 7 sizes, but not the 8th.
it was like Madame of Arcerala was present in our home.
I taught her how to swear.
I guess.
I did.
I mean, you don't have her voice.
I don't have her voice
you
because I
haven't
don't smoke.
Or drink bourbon, apparently.
I drink bourbon. It just
Not
doesn't.
that much.
I'm not as old as her. Well, just wait. When I'm in my 70s, I will sound after having smoked
2 packs a day
for the next 20 years.
Right.
I will sound like Shura Agdashu.
Yeah.
But anyway, we have not revamped the sleeve.
Fucking cocksucker.
We've not changed the sleeve in that it is still a historically accurate sleeve, but we have marked it up so that it'll be easier for you to put it together.
Yeah.
So if you ever had problems with the sleeve, and give 017 and 002 a try again, because I worked really, really hard on this sleeve so that you would have an easier time putting it together. Also, the 017 sleeve now includes a tippet option.
Oh, yes.
Which it didn't before, because it was brought to my attention that we had a woman,
on the front
one of the
cover
characters in the front cover with tippets, and there was no tippet.
Yeah.
So now it's marked for how you cut it to make a tippet. So that's there too.
Yeah.
And
so that's the updates. You've been working on some new stuff.
Yes, there is a new 1948 sundress pattern just in time for the good weather.
That's fabulous.
With the drapey in the back. I mean, everyone will follow you home. The back is the back skirt is draped in a lovely way. It's so I know it's 1948, but it's so Mrs. Maisel. It's so Mrs. Maisel.
It's really nice.
And beautiful bodice.
So that's on the website.
That's
There'll be
on
a link
the
in the
website.
show notes.
1390 is a 1930s women's double-breasted jacket that's new. We've also got, we put out a newsletter about the men's casual trousers work shirt, which is 983 and 982.
Those are in progress.
Those are...
But available for pre-order.
No, they're available. They're done.
They're done. Oh.
They're done. They're done.
I lose track, ladies and gentlemen, because I pull out my drawing tablet and I complete my assignments, and then
I do
they disappear into the swirling vortex of Cass's process, and I never see them again. Yes. So.
And I think we mentioned on the last podcast that the Bloomers 1034 was revamped.
Yes,
with some simplified instructions, which are still historically accurate.
Yes.
So you can make really, really quick, really, really huge bloomers now, without complicated anything.
Yeah.
And also the cycling jackets,
Yes.
the single-breasted and double-breasted cycling jackets are available on the website now, as are the motoring coats.
Right.
The men's is 1095, the women's 1096 and 1097 are all available.
So all that stuff we've been telling you about for weeks and weeks and weeks, it's getting there.
It's getting there.
It's getting there.
It's slowly but surely. We're continuing working on pattern revisions, and we are also working on made to measures. People, made to measure. If you haven't sent me your measurements, I can't do it without your measurements. Come on. I'm getting a little frustrated because I have your money. I have your money. I'd like to deliver your patterns, but I can't guess.
We're ready.
I can't guess.
As soon as you send us measurements, we'll do it that same day.
Yep.
If we can turn it around that fast, we will.
Yep. So
what else is new? We've debuted the Vintage Voyages.
Vintage Voyages. We've been talking about it for.
There'll be a card up here to the first episode.
Yeah, we've had our first episode of Vintage Voyages,
which is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I just finished cutting together 3 more, so they'll be trickling out over the course, one a week.
And we were laughing about it because we're all bundled up in winter clothing for this video, and we were going, ah ha ha, it's summertime outside. You know, got sunburn last weekend. It's 70 degrees and we're all bundled up in coats, and then it snowed.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
So yeah.
As of this filming, on April Fool's Day.
On April Fool's Day.
We woke up to a dusting of snow, and it just continued to flurry all day long.
Yeah.
And it was just, if you go onto our Instagram or Facebook feeds and go back to April 1st, 2022, because God knows when people are going to see this video.
It snowed.
You'll see
pictures of snow outside.
Yeah.
So, and cold. You know, it was,
cold. I went for
freezing.
a walk this morning at about 8:30 a.m., and it was 1 degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Celsius.
So yes. So
it's cold.
We laughed about us wearing these winter coats, and then we had to go get our winter coats again. So there will be more Vintage Voyages.
We're going to probably record we'll probably record some more Vintage Voyages, but we've got a lot coming out over the course of the next month.
Yes.
And we'll be recording more, and going to do, our target for those is once every 2 weeks.
Yes, once every 2 weeks, and we're trying to make Thursday our premiere day. So podcast on Tuesday, and then other videos on
Vintage
Thursday.
Voyages and etc. on Thursday.
Please subscribe. If you ring the bell, you'll get notifications.
Yeah, ding-a-ly-ding.
Or swing by our YouTube channel on Tuesdays and Thursdays and see what's up. So, we're working hard, because I didn't have enough to do with pattern revisions and new patterns. Now we're going to do the videos.
Like you have anything to do with the videos other than dressing up and swanning about.
Dressing up and swanning about takes a lot. Do you think this happens?
Somebody's going to put a gun to your head. Are you kidding me? Get out of here.
It doesn't happen as easily as it used to.
Well,
it's hard. Getting dressed is hard.
You need a lady's maid.
I need I don't know, someone with a stick to make me get dressed. Yeah.
Or
Get out of your lounging pajamas.
Exactly.
Get out of your lounging pajamas.
Put on trousers.
Put on trousers.
Put on trousers.
Yes, there we go.
It's basically what is Vintage Voyages? Well, it's basically we dress in vintage or vintagey clothing and go swan about somewhere.
Yeah.
The first one we did, we were swanning about a village nearby that has some cool medieval landmarks. Mm-hmm. One that's coming up.
And the largest chair in Europe.
The largest chair in Europe.
Largest chair in Europe.
Which Cass is like, why don't you go climb up and sit in it? I'm like, no, they'll get arrested. I'll get arrested. Anyway, we've got one coming up that is the Cherry Blossom Festival at a Japanese garden just over the border in Belgium. Mm-hmm. We've done
when it was not snowing, and we were not wearing
snowing cherry blossoms.
Yeah, we weren't wearing winter clothing there.
No. And then we did a walking tour of a village nearby where Van Gogh lived and painted many of his works.
That's Van Gogh for those of you what don't speak foreign.
And we've got some other. It's just fascinating stuff that we've got coming up. It's just the sort of thing where we're always carrying our phones, right? We sat down one day and we're always got our phones. I had just gotten a new phone that had much more memory than my old phone.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of pulling it out of the pocket and shooting some video.
Yeah, and I mean now that we're allowed to go places again. And I mean, when we started Vintage Voyages, you can see from the first one, we were still in lockdown. There was no one on the streets.
Yeah. Well, there were some people standing in the terrace of a restaurant. Everything was closed.
Yeah.
So the sidewalk cafes were technically closed.
But you could pick up a coffee.
You could get takeaway coffee. So they were going in, getting their takeaway coffee, and then sitting in the terrace and observing social distancing. I noticed.
Yes, and looking at us funny when we were filming them for fear that we were going to.
I didn't put that.
I know, because they looked at us like we were going to send it to the police or something, which we weren't. I mean, they weren't doing anything wrong. They were getting their coffee and chatting with their friends.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
But now,
But now you can do anything you want.
One feature that we're going to put in links in the show notes for our Vintage Voyages is where we stop for lunch. Because we generally go in the morning, and we'll stop for lunch or at the very least a cup of coffee at a cafe.
We stopped at a nice cafe.
Yeah.
So Vintage Voyages, we have large plans for these.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at that and go, well, that's not much of a voyage. Well, it was as much of a voyage as we could do.
In hard lockdown.
But, there are going to be things where we just go to a local place. And then there are going to be things where we go on a grand excursion.
Yeah. One day I will actually master the gimbal that...
Yeah.
See, you know what a gimbal is, folks. It's one of those things you clip your camera to or your phone, and it keeps everything steady. So as you're walking, it keeps the thing from jerking all over the place.
Except when you jerk it all over the place.
It also has a joystick on it for adjustment, and I'm awful. I was awful at it in the first video.
But admittedly, you were awful at video games that have a joystick as well.
As noted in the Vintage
not
Voyages video.
Not a fighter pilot.
I was never good at the flight simulator type thing. So
Vintage Voyages, it's not just going to be little Dutch towns near us. We just started there.
I mean, it is now.
It is, I mean, we're in the Netherlands, and there are really cool little places near us. So we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But we're going to go to bigger places, and we're going to do some rather grand voyages.
Yep.
But
if there's something you'd like to something you'd like for us, someplace you think we might want to visit, drop us a line.
Mm-hmm.
Drop us a comment on this video or on one of the Vintage Voyages videos. If there's some production value you would like to see improved or changed, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're trying to go with a very, no narration, no music, just walk along with us and experience the journey. But you might not like that.
Yeah.
You might want, slick transitions and
we're
dramatic music or whatever.
We're doing this for your entertainment,
Yeah.
so let us know what entertains you, and we will evolve. Because the Vintage Voyages it's about entertaining you. It's about showing you things. So if you don't like to hear the sound of Bob's footsteps and us muttering in the background, and you want us to put some music over it, we will. But if you like that the ASMR edge to that's fine too.
Because I can always write some boring nonsense about wherever it is we are and whatever it is we're doing, and do a droning narration.
And if you'd like to hear the Velvet Pipes in their drone mode,
or dramatic sort of live, live
30s newscaster.
And here we are today on the it's news.
Yeah. Is it?
What else?
What else?
Speaking of news, I don't think, but that's pretty much the list, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I would like to talk about something that I've talked about before in articles and blog posts.
I'm going to sit back.
You're going to sit back.
Yep.
You're going to sit back. What is the purpose of patterns?
Oh, good topic.
Yeah.
You don't mind if I interject from?
No. Do please interject because you understand very well the purpose of patterns. Something occurred this week. It was a rather unpleasant occurrence that showed me that I need to explain to our customers and to anyone who's watching this YouTube video, indeed, what the purpose of patterns, sewing patterns, are, because I think that people get confused as to what the pattern is supposed to do. Now let's do a little bit of history on patterns. When were patterns invented? There have always been shapes that clothing makers have used and had in their arsenal, so to speak, where you see these, woodcuts or illustrations of tailors, and they have patterns hanging on the wall, and they're cardboard, and you take them down and trace them off and stuff. And that's not really, in the industry we call that a marker. That's not a pattern.
Right.
because what the purpose of that is not to give you the precise size, it's to give you the shape. So when you pull a sleeve marker off the hook, you don't say, oh, this is a sleeve for a man, size this, that didn't exist. Sizing didn't exist.
Right.
When these were being used in tailor shops like this. But basically, you would pull the marker down and put it on your fabric and say, oh, that's the shape of a fashionable sleeve. And then you would use your calculations, your mathematical calculations, to make the sleeve in the size of your customer. So the pattern wasn't for you to cut exactly. The pattern was to show you the right shape. So if shapes this season are, big leg of mutton sleeves with a big sleeve top and then narrow bottom, this piece of cardboard would show you how you cut that kind of sleeve in the flat.
Okay.
So it wasn't sized, it wasn't precise, it was kind of just draw this shape.
Right.
Because from your experience as a tailor or dressmaker, you knew how to make the right size for the customer.
Here's your basic shape.
But here's the shape.
From which you can adjust to, right.
So when you make a leg of mutton sleeve, you know from your experience that a sleeve that fits tight to the body looks like this.
Right.
And so the leg of mutton sleeve looks like this.
Right.
You would know how to draw that onto your sleeve.
Right, I get you.
So patterns originally weren't sized. Patterns, what we're perceiving as patterns in those woodcuts, are basically design ideas. This is this type of sleeve. This is the shape. So real sewing patterns didn't come into use until the late 1800s.
Right.
The
latter half of the 19th century.
Latter half of the 19th century, when women's magazines would publish pictures of the pattern, the pieces that make up a garment, so that you would know what the pieces look like. So, and again, some of them were sized, some of them were just, here are the pieces drawn like this. So you know how to make a basic bodice because
you've done it before.
If you sew, you know how to make a basic bodice. And these patterns, and I say this emphatically, the patterns in women's magazines and the patterns that were later printed on tissue and for sale in sewing shops were not for professionals.
Right.
However, if you were going to use them, a certain basic sewing knowledge was...
A certain level of expertise was assumed.
Right. And so very quickly after these shapes started to be printed, just, the shapes on the page, in the women's magazines produced supplements.
Okay.
And the supplements, so here's a women's magazine. This one is from March 1879, from a magazine called La Mode Illustrée, which is a French magazine, and I have it in reproduced form. And the magazine shows a picture of the garment that you're going to be able to make. And then they give you a supplement which has the pattern pieces. That looks like this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like a tube map of London.
Yeah.
Or something.
And you can follow in these places. These are a bunch of different garments are represented on one sheet, and in these places are where each garment is.
Legend.
Yeah, and the legend is follow the wavy lines for the sleeve, follow the dotted lines for the front bodice. These kind of things.
Right.
So it's a thing. And any of you who have purchased these replica facsimiles of the women's fashion magazines like La Mode Illustrée, or there's a Butterick catalog that goes back to the 1880s that sets things up very much the same way. I have some German ones from the 1920s. And this was a very common thing to do. And that's crazy.
Certainly not what we would expect from a modern pattern.
And you can also see that that's roughly the size of the original page.
Right.
The original page wasn't to size, and the size it was, let me see what size this is.
I'll do a soft shoe.
Yeah, you do a soft shoe. No, it's a coat, so it doesn't even give a size because it's a cloak.
Yeah.
the one that there's 2 children's patterns there, and it says a children of 6 years, a boy of 6 years, a girl of 9 years. I mean, that's not a size, but that was a size at the time.
What if the boy's fat?
Yeah, exactly. Well, then you yeah.
Roll them in flour.
Yep. Creams. But anyway, so that's what patterns were for a very long time. And the point of this, the other thing is, if you read the instructions, it says, put the sleeve on the body and close.
Sew the front to the back.
Sew the front to the back, close the darts. You're done. And then you go, what? And how am I supposed to finish the edges? How am I supposed to hem it? How am I supposed to...
Just assumes you know, right?
How am I supposed to line it? Well, if you sew, you know these things. If you sew...
Or at least you did in the 1870s.
Yeah. If you sew, you've put together a garment before.
Right.
And, ultimately, human beings generally have 2 arms and 2 legs and a head.
Generally.
Generally. And generally, you put a sleeve on this side and a sleeve on that side.
I mean, there are plenty of people who get by with, missing an arm or a leg or both arms or both legs.
But their clothing still has a place for it.
Yeah, and it invariably has a hole through which to stick the head.
Yes, and you don't have 3 sleeves.
Right.
What I'm saying is that typically a bodice covers the body or the torso. Pants cover legs, sleeves cover arms. This is universal.
Right.
So when you learn how to sew a pattern, putting in a lining or making a facing or making buttonholes or these kind of things, these are beyond the scope of a pattern. Now, that being said, we're not in the 1880s anymore. And again, these were not patterns for professionals. These were patterns for home sewers.
And some of the originals we have from around the turn, the fin de siècle.
Yeah.
Through the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the modern day, there comes they can start to contain more and more instructions.
Oh yeah, the ones from the 1920s, you didn't have instructions. I mean, the pattern pieces were notched, and you would line up the notches.
And darts were usually figured with little perforations.
Yeah, and so then you didn't have there weren't instructions in the envelope.
Right.
There were only pattern pieces in the envelope. You took the pattern pieces out and you cut them and you put them together, and it was always one size.
Right.
So, sometimes they were even cut for you. So, you had them. Then on the pattern envelope, it would say, match notch 1 with notch 3 and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And that's all it would say. It would have a paragraph, and that was the entire garment. So when we've reproduced patterns from the 1920s, we sit down and try to write for modern
because
people.
in the 20s and in the 30s and in the 40s, more instructions began to be given. Like the big companies started to put separate sheets, like, I don't know, almost sometimes tabloid-sized sheets that had instructions printed on them. And
they still assumed a certain amount of knowledge. They assumed that you had sewn before.
That's what I was going to say, but that's about where it stopped.
Yeah.
And because it became beyond the scope of the pattern to provide much more, like it would say something like, match double notches, ease the sleeve into the arm's eye.
And then when you got to the 1950s, I mean, I just did one from the 1950s, and it had in the pattern illustrations and teaching you how to hem the skirt.
Right.
And that's the earliest that you ever get anything like that, because why would a pattern need to teach you how to hem a skirt?
Yeah, because
don't you know how to hem a skirt? And it even shows you how to get your friends with a yardstick.
Yeah.
You stand there, and your friend with the yardstick marks the hem of your skirt and then cuts it properly, and how to let it hang for a couple days so that it'll get the fabric will get all it's growing out of, so your hem will be straight, and all of this stuff that you learn if you sew. You know, this is stuff my mom taught me. You know, this is stuff that you learn when you learn to sew. You learn how to do a hem. You learn how to mark a hem.
I think my point, Hill, my point there is that's where instructions stopped in terms of including basic techniques. And it's not, I don't think it's because anything stagnated. Because, you know, someone could make an argument that, well, you could include more instructions in that. But yeah, you can, but then you can't.
Yeah.
Because then there becomes a tipping point we discovered very early on with reconstructing history. Now, let me say from the outset, full transparency here, neither one of us have a background in education and pedagogy.
No.
I was an education major in uni in the mid-90s for about 2.5 hours. And that's as far as I got.
Yeah.
So what we're applying our own practical experience, and you have to take a note, I think, from where patterns, the big commercial pattern houses, the way they do things.
Yes.
Because, yes, okay, they don't want the expense of putting more paper in the patterns, but there's also a point where putting more instructions in becomes confusing to the user. It becomes subject to the law of diminishing returns.
And that's a general rule of technical writing.
Right.
You know, which is something that we do.
Yes, well, that's what instructions are.
Yeah. If you, back in the early days, I made the first patterns and I put instructions in that I thought were sufficient. And I got feedback from people saying this isn't enough.
Right.
And so then a friend of mine advised me, and I wrote instructions that were so thick, nobody read them.
Right.
That if you're telling someone to sew from point A on the front to point B on the front, attach it to point C on the back to point D on the back, people skip that.
Yeah.
And they don't, and it's not necessary. Sew the front to the back. There's one place where you sew the front to the back here, you sew the front to the back here. You're done.
Yeah.
And if you put in a book of instructions, and I know there have been people attempting to start pattern companies who thought that they would write a book of instructions. Customers don't read that.
Yeah.
What pattern users want is the quickest and dirtiest.
Yep.
Now,
because why do you buy a pattern? You buy a pattern to save yourself time.
Right. So if you want to do something quick and dirty, you have to give them the fewest instructions possible and possibly lots of illustrations.
Yeah.
But then illustrations can get complicated because if you take a photograph of something, sometimes it's very hard to see what's going on in that photograph unless you understand the photograph. So an illustration has to be a simplified form of the photograph.
And that's another thing that we learned from the original patterns that we have is the illustrations are not, well, they're simple. They're very simplified.
And if you simplify the illustration to the point where there's no extraneous stuff in there, there's just the illustration, some people are going to say, well, that's not what mine looks like.
Right. What have I done wrong?
Or this pattern piece doesn't match the illustration. And that's, well, it does match the illustration, but the illustration is in 3D and the pattern piece is flat, and that's how it would look like if you were looking at it at this angle, and it gets very confusing. So
again, there's a balance between too much and just enough.
And understand that if Reconstructing History was a pattern company that was trying to be the historical version of simplicity, this would have been easy.
Yeah.
But we didn't set out to make costume patterns. We set out to make patterns for historical clothing, which means we're using techniques that are not common, sometimes aren't even known to the modern sewer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like you mentioned when you were talking about the updates to 017
Yeah.
and 00Q.
Yeah. I'm not going to make a modern sleeve. I'm not going to put a modern sleeve on 017. You get 017 in your hot little hands and you go get a sleeve from the Simplicity pattern and stick it on it. I will never know. I will not fault you for doing that if that's what you want to do. But I will not put a modern sleeve in a medieval pattern. A medieval sleeve belongs on that dress, and that's why you pay me for my patterns.
Yeah, and
So, knowing that, and knowing that before the 1870s, 80s, whatever, sewing wasn't codified. It wasn't this, here's this box of rules. Learn them, and now you're a sewer.
Well, I mean, there was, but it was one of the mysteries of the guild that you didn't divulge out of your trades.
And, very important thing, the mysteries of the guild only applied to the clothing of people who could afford to pay a professional tailor. The vast majority of human beings, up until the 19th century, weren't paying a tailor.
Right.
The vast majority of human beings were wearing clothing that was made by either someone in their household or that they bought secondhand. So
even rich people
bought secondhand
because we have all those Paston letters where Margaret is writing to John, either asking him to buy some fabric and have it shipped to the house, or telling him what they've made from the fabric. That when he followed his instructions, because there are some letters where she's just like, "Where's that fabric I told you to buy, you bastard?" But where she's waxing rhapsodic about the lovely gowns she's had made for livery or for a relative or something like that. But no, he's shipping fabric home, and Margaret is at least directing the construction of the garments in the household in the 1450s, 60s, 70s.
And the household in the 15th century was not. I mean, this is one of the things that, don't pay attention to Bridgerton. Bridgerton gets everything wrong.
Oh my God.
I mean, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful colors.
And the story is wonderful.
If raunchy. Is the story one? I don't think the story's wonderful. The story's...
I like it, but I'm easily amused, and there's boobs.
Sexist bunch of horseshit. I mean, if you're going to change something. But anyway, what we think of as the household, rich people's household, is based on the Victorian idea of here are servants all dressed in black and they live in this part and they don't talk to anybody and they do stuff. It's Downton Abbey, that's real. But that wasn't in the Regency, and particularly in the Middle Ages. Your servants often were members of your family who were not, who were cousins. And they weren't slaves. They didn't live in as nice a part of the house as you did, but they lived in your guest bedroom. They didn't live in your good guest bedrooms. They lived in your family guest bedrooms. And often they were younger men and women in your family who came to you to learn how to run a household so that when they grew up and got married, they could run their own household. So this idea of servants being, a lower form of life, or, don't mix with the servants, put them in black and put them over the other side and they don't get days off and stuff like that. Servants were part of your distant relatives, or not quite so distant relatives. And so...
And it was incumbent on you to treat them as family, even if they weren't directly related to you. We could go on a complete tangent here about the
servants.
15th century household.
Yes, and...
But let's talk about livery then, since we're talking about what they're wearing. That while they're not wearing a codified black and white uniform like 1920s servants for Downton Abbey, and they're not dressed in ornate archaic wigs and frock coats like the footmen at Buckingham Palace. They were wearing livery that you provided. Again, we're talking about Pastons.
When they were seen, though.
Yes.
I mean, what they were wearing at home all the time, but when they were going to be seen for any kind of occasion,
guests coming over,
the people in your household all wore like the team uniform. Which is usually the colors of the household and sometimes with a badge. So I just bumped my...
Sometimes with
sometimes with the badge. We'll put it on this side. But not the point. But anyway, so the people in your household
How did we get here from patterns?
We were talking about in the Middle Ages people making stuff.
They didn't have them.
They didn't have. Well, you didn't have. That the people who were making. The people whose profession it was to make clothing were working for a very, very few people.
Right.
So even the Pastons, who were the family of a knight, he was the highest ranking person. Was
Sir John.
Sir John was the highest ranking person. So he's only a knight. You know, he's not a peer of the realm or anything.
Wealthy landowning gentry.
Wealthy landowning gentry. So wealthy landowning gentry. Sometimes wealthy landowning gentry, more money than the king. Although I don't know in that. But sometimes, and they were not getting their clothing made by tailors. Their clothing was being made by people in their household who were not professional sewers, but they were very, I don't want to say very experienced, and those of you who have known me for a long time know why.
Accomplished.
They were advanced.
Yeah, they knew enough.
They knew enough to make a garment, and they didn't have to go look it up or call somebody. So this kind of knowledge fell off. You know, in the 19th century and even the early 20th century, every young girl was taught to sew.
Yeah.
And even if you were very rich and you were never going to sew anything for yourself, you still knew how to do a hem and do some embroidery and fix a button and all this kind of stuff. Even if you were so rich you would never have to do a button, you knew how to do it because it was part of women's education. And so we have that sewing as part of women's education going well up into the 20th century.
Right.
I mean, there were home ec classes in my school.
Mine too.
In my high school.
I excelled at the sewing part of my home ec courses.
I was not allowed to take home ec courses in my high school because I was in the college-bound tract, and college-bound girls didn't get to take sewing or cooking or any of that thing.
In middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My middle school didn't have a sewing machine. My middle school didn't have heat. So, no, I mean, we had heat. It was the 70s.
It was uphill both ways.
No, seriously. It was the 70s, and it was an old building, and it was the oil crisis in the 70s, so we didn't pay for oil.
Couldn't fuel the boilers.
So we literally sat in, they didn't tell you they turned the heat off.
Right.
But they had the heat on just enough so the pipes wouldn't freeze.
Right.
And we sat in class every day with our coats on.
Yep.
Yeah, it was abuse. It was terrible abuse. But
there you go.
You know,
so,
anyway,
patterns.
Catholic school in the 70s.
Focus. Can we focus?
Oh, we never focus. Anyway, so the point being that patterns assume a certain amount of knowledge, and patterns have always assumed a certain amount of knowledge since the beginning. And the beginning isn't the Middle Ages. The beginning is
the
19th century.
The late 19th century.
The late 19th century.
That how much knowledge patterns assume over time has gotten smaller and smaller.
Smaller and smaller. However...
But it reached an equilibrium point around the middle of the 20th century where it remains today.
Yes. A sewing pattern is not going to teach you how to thread your machine.
No.
You know, that's in a different book. That's go get your machine book and look in the book.
Every machine is different.
Every machine is different, although there's a certain...
There are similarities,
thing. Like you go, it has to go like that and has to go like that, and you know.
Yeah.
How to change the needle in your machine, how to thread a hand needle, how to do a buttonhole, how to sew on a button. These are things that are... It's not in the realm of pattern instructions to teach you how to do things. But
we go the extra mile with giving stitches with which a modern sewer may not be familiar, or maybe once was familiar but hasn't used in a long time.
Yeah. And all the stitches...
Like I have to look at the stitch thing. Every time I want to do a buttonhole, I have to look at the stitch, the period stitches, because I can't keep that stuff in my head.
Yeah, and if I want to do a 18th century buttonhole, because there's an extra loop in an 18th century buttonhole, I always have to look at the diagram, because normally you do a buttonhole and it's just blanket stitch, and that's legitimate. But if you're doing a proper 18th century buttonhole, it's blanket stitch and then an extra little, it comes back up. So I have to look at the thing, because I don't do them
Not that
often.
I'm any good at buttonholes anyway. Hi, Laura.
Yeah, you suck. No, everyone sucks at the first buttonhole. Everyone sucks at the first buttonhole. The first buttonhole, you should never do it on the outfit.
Anywhere you're going to see it. Yeah.
No, don't do it on the outfit. Take a piece of fabric. Take a piece of fabric and take the lining. Make a sandwich of all of the layers that you're going to put the buttonhole through, and do a couple practice buttonholes on that, because the first one sucks. And normally people put the first one. They do the first one right up here, and that's never. And he wore a falling collar over it.
Well, the one that I'm talking about, that Laura Mellon, bless you, took the project out of my hands and said, just give them to me, I'll do them. I was doing a pair of 16th century breeches.
Oh, it was the breeches.
And the breeches, the fly on the breeches, it starts at the waist and it goes all the way down to basically where the pieces meet at the perineum. Is that the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
What I commonly call the taint.
Yeah, it's called the crutch.
The crotch, there. So but anyway, the buttons go down that far. The whole fly, it's split that far, and the fly stand goes down that far. So I was working on one where no one was ever going to see unless we really needed to be properly introduced. And I did like 3 of them. And she's sitting there and she's looking at me, she's like, what the hell is that? She's much more polite than that. Do tell me what you're trying to achieve.
I don't know if she was much more polite than that. I remember her going, give me that.
But she just basically snatched it out of my hands. And anyway,
so
thankfully, and it looked nice.
Yeah. Always do practice buttonholes.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many buttonholes you've done in your life. I have done many buttonholes, and finished the buttonholes on the coat and went to do the buttonholes on the waistcoat and had to practice because I was switching fabrics and I was switching thread.
Yeah.
Always practice. It doesn't matter how good you are at this. Always do the first one on a scrap. Always. Anyway, that's not the point.
Circling back around.
The point is, what patterns are not going to teach you how to sew.
Right.
If you want to learn how to sew, take a class. I mean, and here's the thing. If you take a class on how to sew and then you go use a historic pattern that is produced in the historic manner, a historic pattern, not a modern, here's a 14th century coterie, but it's, simplicity made it. And I know, right? The modern sewing class, this is so complicated. Okay, this is why it's complicated. A modern sewing class doesn't understand how things were sewn before the sewing machine was invented.
Right.
And how things were sewn before the sewing machine was invented isn't just by hand. I'm going to do a video on this one of these days. One of these days, I'm going to have a video, and it's going to start with a rant, and it's going to end with a rant, and you're going to have to go listen to the rant in the beginning to get to the middle where I show you how to do it. Because medieval clothing was not sewn like modern clothing, and I don't mean medieval clothing was sewn by hand and modern clothing is sewn with a machine. The order of things is different. The way you hold things is different. The layer that you sew is different. And the reason it's different is because that makes more sense to hand sewing. And when everyone started using a machine, suddenly hand stitching changed. Yeah. And hand stitching became finishing work. Mm-hmm. And when we hand sew, we emulate a sewing machine. Mm-hmm. And that is not correct.
Right.
You can do it, knock yourself out, but that isn't conducive to the way medieval, Renaissance, 18th century, early 19th century things were put together. You put something together in an order that makes sense. That order doesn't make sense for a sewing machine.
Yeah.
And so it's very complicated. So this is the problem with people whose personal sense of value is caught up in them being a very experienced seamstress. And this is why it became the joke. The very experienced seamstress knows everything there is to know about making modern garments, and that's terrific. And I am not a very experienced modern seamstress at all. I honor those people. They have an incredible amount of knowledge that I do not share. However, if you're making a garment from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or even the 18th century or even the early 19th century, that is not a garment in your purview. Those are not techniques in your purview.
Right.
If you are a very experienced modern seamstress, this is, you know how to build and repair an automobile. And this is a horse and carriage.
No, I have a friend.
The horse is broken down. What do we do? Change his oil? No.
I have a friend who is a woodworker.
There we go.
And he has...
Good example.
Yeah. Well, here's an example. Here's a metaphor for, like, the pattern tells you to ease the sleeve into the armscye. It's my favorite thing.
I know.
It's one sentence long.
Once you learned what ease was, it opened up your world.
It's one sentence long, but you can fill a book on how to ease, which means it's completely beyond the scope of a pattern. In the same way, a set of woodworking plans will tell you to, I don't know, chamfer an edge. It's not going to tell you how to chamfer the edge.
I only know how to do it in AutoCAD.
Right.
I don't know what it means. I just know how to make the shape.
Here's the thing. I have a friend who is an accomplished woodworker, has a garage full of really expensive power tools, right? And can make beautiful, like he can turn a bowl and he can do it, look at, he's split, but the walls are paper thin and anyway, he can build armoires and all, boats, whatever he wants. But he wanted to build a 3-legged fucking stool.
And didn't know how to chamfer an edge?
No, he wanted to do it in the medieval way.
Yeah.
And he cut down an entire damn tree and he went through most of it because he knew that he needed green wood. He knew that he had to, bore the holes for the legs. He had to do all this stuff. And yeah, you can do it in a half an hour with a hatchet and an auger and make something you can sit on, but he wanted to make something that was nice.
Yeah.
And he had to learn about how grain dries in different ways and where you put the holes and how you construct it makes when it dries, it pulls against itself so it doesn't, because usually when wood dries, it gets smaller, so legs fall out of the holes you bore.
And modernly, you just glue it, right?
Yeah.
Modernly, you glue it.
Yeah, modernly you glue it, you peg it, you put a screw in, you countersink the screw. Anyway, the point is, it took him months to figure out what for him should be something really, really, really simple, but
it's a completely different set of skills because he was an expert at using these tools, which are very complicated tools and took him many years to master. He had not mastered this previous incarnation of the tools and the knowledge that went with that.
Importantly, for managing your expectations as a sewing user of patterns, that you may run into difficulties with an historical pattern does not invalidate your hard-won expertise as a modern sewer. It does not invalidate that at all.
Yeah.
What it illustrates is that there's another set of skills that building expertise is required.
Yes. And that doesn't mean that you have to become an expert medieval sewer in order to use our patterns. And I will, if you get hung up, always answer your questions. However...
Some of them even I can answer.
Yeah.
Just not buttonholes.
Not buttonholes. Well, you can talk about buttonholes.
Yep.
You just can't do them.
No.
Those who can't, teach. Just saying. This whole... I don't want it to be a rant. I don't mean it to be a rant. I mean it to be an educational opportunity. But this was all precipitated by a very, very nasty series of emails that I received this week from a customer who was in a rush, who demanded express shipping, changed her mind, demanded express shipping again, and finally got the pattern, and then wrote me an email that began with, "Your patterns suck. I don't understand anything. Tell me what this means." The complicated concept in question was cut on the fold. I don't normally respond to emails that begin with abuse. However, I feel that if I hand her the keys to the kingdom by explaining how you cut on the fold, the scales will fall from her eyes. She'll know what she's doing, and she'll be able to have a successful project, and then, she'll be happy.
Yeah.
Because she was very, very angry. And I wrote back and said, on the pattern piece, it says cut 2 on the fold. In the illustration of the layout, you can see that it shows the fabric is folded, and there's the word fold. And then you will see also on the paper pattern piece, there's the word fold. Fold your fabric in half and place the pattern piece where it says fold on the folded fabric and cut. I then received another abusive email. But it says cut 2 on the fold. Am I supposed to cut 2 on the fold? The answer's in the question. It says cut 2 on the fold. Am I supposed to cut 2 on the fold? Yes. But, I held back being an asshole because I really, really, I didn't want to help this person because every single email started with insults. And so I wrote back and I said, yes, what I just explained to you in the last email, do it twice. You need 2 pieces cut like that. So fold your fabric once, cut, fold it again, cut. Then there was a third abusive email, and I decided that this was not going to be anymore, and I gave her her money back, and I blocked her email.
There comes a point where you just have to for self-preservation.
Because, you don't endear yourself to me when you start an email with abuse and insults. And there's only, I don't need to take abuse.
I think the point relevant to our topic.
The point is, if you do not understand, this is not a high concept. And this also, we've been going on and on about how modern sewing is different than medieval or Renaissance or whatever historical sewing.
Yeah.
And this ain't that.
No.
This is, if you have ever sewn anything in your life, there will be, in every pattern that exists, some piece that it says cut on the fold, because pattern companies don't want to make you cut. Pattern companies don't want to print a big, huge thing that's symmetrical.
I'm trying to think of.
I've
done a lot, because much of our 20th century line is stuff that we've gotten from our off-copyright collection. And it's my job, ladies and gentlemen, to go through these and go through the instructions.
Everything that has a straight edge is going to be cut on the fold.
I'm trying to think of one that doesn't have at least one piece that's cut in the fold and can't.
Everything that's symmetrical is cut on the fold.
Yeah, because why would you put
why would the company waste that much paper?
Right.
Why would they charge you for twice the amount of paper?
Yeah.
So you could have the whole blouse front if you could fold it in half and say put a fold here. That is in every pattern that exists, cut on the fold. Nobody puts it
somewhere, surely.
Yeah. Nobody puts it a symmetrical piece flat. Matter of fact, in pattern software, when you design the symmetrical piece, you then say, make a symmetrical axis, fold piece. And so the piece that you've designed goes.
Yep.
This is in the garment industry, this is in the pattern industry, this is the way it is. So someone who doesn't understand the concept of cut on fold has never used a pattern before, has never sewn before.
Yeah, and I have to wonder.
Or has never sewn from a pattern, at least.
Yeah.
And
they may have a raft of experience sewing.
No. what happened here was we got a person who wanted to do something overnight to go somewhere, and she ran out of time, and then she, for some reason, expected to open the pattern, and it was going to make itself. And when you're out of time, you're blaming everybody but yourself. But blame everybody but yourself, but do it silently.
Yeah.
And because you don't understand how to cut on a fold is not my fault.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about scope. I mean, it's not within the scope of a pattern to teach how to cut in a fold or to ease a sleeve into an arm's eye. It might be to teach you how to do a particular kind of stitch in a particular place because that's the historical way to do it.
And I've had people write to me and say, oh, here's a picture. I want to make this thing from this TV show or this anime or what have you. I want to make this outfit. They send me the pictures and I say, oh, you know, RH blah, 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 we'll do that very well.
Yeah.
But
you'll have to do the following modifications.
It's double-breasted and this is single-breasted. Yeah. And then and this is how you change it. This is how you do it. And teach them how to alter my pattern to be the thing they want it to be.
Did that yesterday with a person wanting a particular type of breeches.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't
Luckily, it was simple enough that I could do it.
Yeah, we didn't have the exact breeches that they wanted, but they showed us a picture and we're like, oh, that looks like this. Here, do this and remove that.
This will get you close.
Yeah, remove that, change this, cover that, you know, whatever. And it was a good eye.
Close enough that, it was like this will get you close enough that no one will ever notice.
It really, really good of you to see that because I looked at that and went, we don't have a pattern for that. And you were like, oh, but it looks like this. And I was like, no. And then it did.
Yeah.
It was close enough for what they wanted. So, you know, the thing is, you can't expect a pattern to teach you how to sew. And I think my patterns go very far, at least the pre-modern patterns go very far in teaching you how to sew in the original garment. But
even so, they don't so much teach you how to sew as they teach you how to apply sewing skills you already likely possess.
Well, and here's the thing, right? Let's talk about the Moy gown because, you know, I personally examined the Moy gown and I've made a replica of the Moy gown and I make a pattern for the Moy gown. The pattern for the Moy gown is not going to teach you how to make a replica of the Moy gown.
Right.
Because that is a workshop. That's not even a book.
Right.
That is, you hire me, I come to your place, and we do this for 3 days straight, you know? Not straight. We sleep in between and we also eat and possibly drink. Definitely drink.
After working on the Moy gown?
Oh my God, we drink.
Definitely drink.
After the sleeves, before the sleeves, during the sleeves. There are lots of drinking breaks with the sleeves. If you've ever tried this, you know what the sleeves are like.
Lots of shouting, fucking cocksucker.
Yeah, there you go. So the pattern gives you the pieces of the Moy gown and it gives you some of the stitches and it says, go make the thing. But you're not making a replica of the Moy gown because it doesn't say, you know, sew with this stitch for 3 inches and then switch to this other stitch and then do this, turn it inside out.
Make sure that the first 3 inches of stitches are 5 millimeters apart.
Yeah.
And, you know, the second set of stitches are 2 millimeters apart.
And switch from your S-spun wool to your Z-spun linen thread. And, you know, I mean... So a pattern is meant to get you in the ballpark.
Yep.
And there's another thing. I'm spilling the tea on the garment industry here, as you know I love to do. I literally grew up in the garment industry. I have a lot of relatives who work in the garment industry, and my mother worked at a garment factory, and I literally grew up in that place. So there's stuff that like is in my bones. Like if you sliced me open, it would be there.
She's fond of saying that her comfort smells are hot machine oil.
Machine oil and dust.
And dust.
Fabric dust. Textile dust. Fabric dust. And when I smell it, I just feel at home because that's...
Not macaroni and cheese or, you know...
No, nothing you can eat because my mother was a horrible cook. But, you know, the smell of a factory in use, a textile factory in use. Anyway, I'm spilling tea. Remember we talked in a previous thing, and we're going to link a card, about why pattern sizes don't work or something like that. Not pattern sizes, why garment sizes, you know, the mystery of modern garment sizes and all that. And the reason that the garment industry invented sizing, and the sizing are all typically 2 inches apart. Men and women, no matter where you are in the world, they're 2 inches apart. And we talked about that on our last podcast about how that's for, you can adjust to a different size. You can go up a size with that much extra. And that's why we have 5/8 inch seam allowances. So the garment industry, when it invented off-the-rack sizing, invented this idea of adding extra into a garment so that you can fit it. So because the original...
What do they call that? Fitting ease? No.
Yeah, fitting ease. Fitting ease. Because design ease is extra fabric that you put in a garment because you want it to look fuller.
Yeah.
Fitting ease is extra fabric you put in a garment so you can fit it. So for example, if you took a person's measurements and made them something from a body block, if you made it exactly to those measurements, it would fit skin tight because there's no fitting ease.
Like a late Victorian jacket bodice.
Bodice, yeah.
Like that.
A bodice, a Victorian bodice is meant to fit over the corset, which is why you take your measurements over the corset. And there's no lining, there's nothing in there that needs space. It fits over your corset and you're done. And so there's no ease in there. That's fitting something that tightly based on, bust, waist, and back waist length is impossible because you have those 3 measurements and that's all you've got. That can be 100 different varieties, 100 different shaped people who have those same measurements, which, one of these days I'm going to find that graphic I keep talking about with the 6 different women who have the same measurements and they all look...
One of these days you'll find it.
One of these days I'll find it. I'll probably have to recreate it, but Anyway, so the point is that what the garment industry did when they invented ready-to-wear clothing was they added fitting ease into the garments. And the point was you were going to buy something off the rack and you were going to take it home and you were going to fit it to your body.
Right.
Which people stopped doing. And quite frankly...
The last time I saw anything like that in a common use was buying trousers from dress. Excuse me.
And the length was you had to finish the hands.
Still the zigzag cut.
Yeah, that persisted very late. But I mean, and the point being that when ready-to-wear clothing started, it started in the 1920s when women didn't fit things to their waist or even to their body shape. Everything fell kind of from the underarms.
Right.
And so the idea of fitting ease, you didn't need fitting ease because the thing wasn't going to be fitted to your body.
Right.
And then in the 1930s, things were not everything, but cutting on the bias came in.
Right.
And the bias sucks to your body even when it's not tight.
Right.
Like you could put a bias tent on someone and they'll still suck to their hips. And then by the 1940s, everyone was trying to save fabric because of the war effort. And you had to add in a couple of inches so someone could take it in. And it's kind of interesting if you look at Sears catalogs from the 30s and pre-war 40s, they sell a dress or a woman's suit that is half sewn or half tailored, I think they call it. And I'll see if I can find a graphic to put in. The half tailored was basically all of the finishing work was done, but the side seams weren't finished.
Right. So you would fit it.
So that you would then
either fit it or take it to someone who would fit it.
Yeah. So the thing we're used to in off-the-rack clothing, which granted, most of our modern clothing we buy at a shop and it's bought by size, the fitting ease that the garment industry puts in off-the-rack clothing is a cheat.
Yeah.
In order to make that clothing fit a wide variety of people who have that general measurement. And we won't even get into the fact that, the measurements say 36-inch bust and then they're too small.
Yeah.
But that being said, and now I find that things don't even have number sizes. Most things are small, medium, large, extra large. And what the hell does that mean?
Right.
Every store is different. But anyway, I'm going to get on a rant if I go down that road. So anyway, so there's this fitting ease that's added into clothing. And when we're talking about historical clothing, this is centuries, millennia before the invention of ready to wear,
Right.
off the rack clothing. So we as modern people, because even if you're a modern person who lives in historical clothing today, you didn't all your life.
Right.
And you're used to having a certain amount of ease in your clothing. And this is why when you get men who get into reenactment and particularly 15th century, and you put them in hose and then like, oh, they're too tight. I can't wear them. They're too tight. Get used to it. That's what it is. If it's not tight, it's going to rip. And we had that discussion before about, it has to fit close to your body because it has to move with your body. And that's not to say that your historical clothing has to be tight, but historical clothing follows your body.
Mm-hmm. In many circumstances, it has to be fitted. It has to be fitted to fare thee well.
Exactly. And so we typically, in our patterns, we do not add fitting ease.
Yep. And there's a difference between a historical pattern and a modern pattern that gives you modern clothing that sort of kind of maybe really does look historical. Mm-hmm. It's a modern garment with modern textile engineering principles in play. And you have to know that, like, our patterns ain't got that.
Yeah, and this is why we always say, make a muslin, and then we say, okay, make a muslin, but then fit in the fabric too, because unless you've made a muslin and you're making your final garment in the exact same
I can
muslin.
think of 2 patterns in our entire line where you can do where you're making it out of muslin and then you make it out of muslin, and that's a different kind of muslin.
It is a different kind of muslin. This is the cheap shit, and that's the stuff that's $50 a yard.
Maybe it's just one, 837. 838.
837 and 838,
Yeah.
yep.
Those are the only ones that you should be using muslin for your outer material. And that ain't the kind of muslin we're talking about to make your muck up.
Yeah. So, so that's why you have to test it. It does not make it a bad pattern,
Right.
because you can't run it up and wear it tonight,
Right.
And
there are different textile engineering principles at work, and that is part of why we're talking about, one of the working titles for this podcast is managing expectations. Mm-hmm. Because if your expectation is that your pattern for an historical thing is going to be exactly the same as a pattern for a modern thing, mm-hmm. that's not a problem with the pattern.
Yeah. And also, let's put something else in here.
Yeah.
Because there's another point I want to make slightly different, is once upon a time, a friend of mine who is a professional costumer got a pattern for medieval something, not from me. And she raved and raved and raved at how perfect it was. She cut out the size 42 and it fit the actor that she was making costumes for perfectly without any adjustment. That's luck.
Yeah.
That's dumb luck.
Yeah.
Because just like we were talking about women's, mm-hmm. men, a size 42, even a size 42 regular, size 42.
I was a size 42 regular 21 years ago when we first got married.
Right.
I'm a size 42 regular now. I guarantee you, I am in no way the same. If I took my shirt off right now, I'm not gonna, nobody wants to see that, and showed you what I look like now, mm-hmm. and showed you a picture of me with my shirt off 21 years ago, mm-hmm. you will see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and this is the thing, his waist measurement is the same, his chest measurement is the same, his back waist length is the same.
All that's, but my shape is entirely different.
But his shape is different.
I am what you may call running to seed.
Aren't we all? At least you can still wear your suits. I can't. However,
I did have to have some letting out done a few years ago. So,
the point is, what point was I trying to make?
You were saying that you're...
Oh, yes. So my friend just got frickin' lucky that because we don't fit a pattern size on a human being. we fit it on a mannequin that has perfect size, perfect measurements, and is not squishy.
Yep.
So I fit the patterns on a hard mannequin,
Yep.
which a human being is never like that.
Right.
So,
I don't know, man. Hey.
make the Pillsbury Doyle boy. See? So human beings are squishy. Even The Rock is squishy.
Someplace, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he is squishy.
Yeah.
Because he's not made of steel.
Well,
He's
yeah.
not actually made of rock.
Or
but-
even cardboard.
So it's that a pattern fits, oh, I'm a 42 and it fits me perfectly. That means this is a good pattern. No, that means that you just so happen to be the shape 42 that the pattern used.
Yep.
Because there are other shapes that are also size 42. And I mean, I was once told by one of my colleagues, said, use our mutual friend as a fit model because he's the perfect medieval medium.
Huh?
And he's the medieval men's medium. He's the perfect medieval medium, so you can use him as the medium. And I was just like, he's too short. I think he's too short. But what she was saying was he was a really good average.
If you look at his body type versus, compare it to a pictorial survey, yeah.
No, not a pictorial survey. You look at his body type compared to her customers.
Oh, I see.
He was the median
Right,
size
right. I get
in
it.
height, weight, shape
Right.
to her customers. So he was the perfect medium
Okay.
for she was selling clothing, not patterns. So
Yeah.
but she was like, use him as a medium because he's a perfect medium. And I was like, But anyway, so that's the thing. It doesn't make it a bad pattern because it doesn't fit you when you're a 42 perfectly. It should fit those measurements. But,
Yeah.
there are people who have, they're 42-inch chest, but they're shallow in the front,
Yeah.
or they're
hunch.
stooped, or they're overly erect is also a problem. Pigeon-breasted.
Yeah, there's so many different variables, you can't control them, and the measurements will always be the same.
Yes, and that's the problem. That's why when you walk into a tailor shop, if you ever walk into a bespoke tailor shop, a shop where they are going to make a garment for you from scratch, not they're going to pull one off the rack and fit it to you, but they are going to make a garment for you from scratch. You walk into that tailor shop, and the tailor typically isn't there to greet you. The tailor is typically somewhere else, and someone else greets you because the tailor is looking at you.
Watching you.
Because when you stand for your measurements, you stand up straight,
Yep.
you suck in your gut,
Yep.
you do all this kind of stuff that you would never do normally. But a good tailor watches you walk in the front door and sees if you're stooped, sees if you're overly erect, sees what your normal posture is. I had a friend who,
Not your pose posture, yeah.
yeah, not your pose posture. I had a customer who wanted to make a pair of trousers for himself, and he knew nothing about tailoring, and I was helping him. And he kept sending me pictures and going, "What's wrong? The drape is wrong. What's the back of the trousers look wrong?" And I was like, it's just a photograph. You can't tell everything from it. But I was looking at it, and I went, "Do you stand with your hips pushed forward?" And he does. He stands in this weird way, like
Superhero pose number 2.
no, not even not his chest though, just his hips shoved forward.
Right.
And I'm like, because what the pattern was, what the pictures were telling me was that he had no ass. But I'd seen him in other trousers and knew that he wasn't flat in the back. So why are the wrinkles
Yeah.
showing me that he has no ass? And it's because he tucks his butt under and pushes his hips
Right.
forward, and that changes where the waistband
Yep.
is. So the waistband is wrong. And for someone who stands like that normally, you have to change the angle of the waistband. You
Yeah.
have to make the back of the pants
Yeah, you got
shorter.
You have to change it.
You have to change it.
We've been at this long enough.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is, number one, a pattern will not teach you how to sew. Number two, if you are experienced in sewing modernly and using modern patterns,
Awesome.
terrific, wonderful. But it is not a black mark on your soul if you run into something in a pre-modern pattern that you don't know how to do. It's a different skill. Don't think it's someone pointing the finger at you and saying you're flawed. You're not flawed. You just don't have that skill. I can help you acquire that skill. Number 3, and possibly the most important thing, please do not start an email with an insult.
Right.
Because I am tired of people, bad behavior.
Yeah. Let's just not do that.
Yeah. We've gone through this last 2 years with COVID, and a lot of us have changed a lot of things that we will tolerate and not tolerate in the world. And if you begin an email with an insult, I do not care if you go on the internet and say to everyone that I didn't answer your email. I will not answer an email that begins with an insult.
Let's just be kind.
You don't have to throw roses at me, although if you say, I love your patterns, but I'm having a problem, that's always nice. But really, just, dear Reconstructing History, I'm having a problem, I hope you can help me. And I will help you, and I will help you. I will write you 10 times to help you.
Bending over backwards here,
Don't start
be kind.
Don't write anyone.
Do be kind.
An email that starts with an insult.
Yeah.
There's a war going on. Just don't be a dickhead.
It doesn't help. I mean, I don't know who thinks it. I learned an awfully long time ago that when you call someone or you go into like the DMV or something like that, it's an old saying that you win more flies with honey. Mm-hmm. And okay, you're pissed off. Nobody's saying you have to suck up, but be kind.
And never forget, we're from Philly. Don't start none. Won't be none.
I mean, I'm not from Philly, but...
I'm not from Philly either, but...
We lived for long enough in such close proximity to Philly that the radiation washed over us.
The radiation of Philly.
That hateful city of brotherly misery, radiation washed over us.
No, but I'm not from Philly, but the TV channels I grew up watching were Philadelphia, New York TV channels. So my culture...
Yeah.
And because...
So at the end of the day, keep in mind what your expectations are before you judge.
And I'm not making excuses. Please don't think I'm making excuses, because I am working very, very hard to revamp all of the patterns from 20 years ago when I wasn't as good at drafting.
Yeah.
Now I've learned so much, and I'm revisiting those patterns.
Yep. Nobody's saying that everything is flawless.
No. Absolutely not. I mean, I know that when I started this company, I knew how to. Well, I'm a draper. I mean, I make historical clothing. I drape it on a body, and so learning how to draft patterns. Basically, what I used to do is I would drape it on a body, and then I would sew it, and then I would take it off the body, unsew it, lay it on a table, and
you've learned a lot
it.
about drafting patterns in the intervening years, and patterns have gotten better and better and better. Mm-hmm. That's why you're improving them.
And they are. So please don't think for a second that I'm saying don't complain about my patterns. You're wrong if you complain. I mean, there are things that people complain about that are they are mistaken to complain about, because they're complaining about. I had a woman once who complained, well, you're definitely not simplicity because this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely not simplicity. And if you wanted simplicity, buy frickin' simplicity.
I mean,
because simplicity. Because
that's really
this is a 1690s mantua, and if simplicity comes out with a 1690s mantua, I will laugh my fucking head off.
Yeah, I mean, what we're saying is make sure your expectations, or do your best to make sure your expectations are in line with reality.
Yes.
But
a pattern.
Be kind.
A pattern is not meant to teach you how to sew. And more importantly...
That's an expectation that needs to be in line with reality.
If you want to make something for the weekends, don't buy a pattern on Thursday and expect this is going to go well.
Yeah.
Because even if you are very experienced, even if you have used historical patterns before, unless you have made that garment before, don't expect to do it in 2 days.
And listen, it doesn't matter if you're doing a Moy gown or if you're doing a Yar pirate costume from McCall's. if you buy it on Thursday and you need to wear it Friday, you are going to be a basket case.
You're just going to set yourself up for failure, so don't do it.
Yeah.
And if you do set yourself up for failure and end up, in a ball in tears with scraps of fabric all over the place, don't blame anyone but yourself.
A master craftsman never blames his tools.
Yeah. So,
with that,
in this world, we're all trying to be a little kinder to each other. Donate to your favorite Ukrainian relief charity.
Yep.
Be good to your neighbors. Help the people on your block.
Yep.
We love you guys.
We love you. Like that. That's how it goes.